Hello, all, and welcome. My name is Yasmina Tawil. I am the film programs curator at the Arab Film and Media Institute, and I'm very excited today to introduce a conversation with Tamer Ruggli, the filmmaker behind Back to Alexandria. He will be in conversation with George Iskander, who is a writer and it works on film procurement at the Chicago Palestine Film Festival. Tamer's film will be playing as part of the 28th Arab Film Festival, taking place in the San Francisco Bay Area and online from October 24th to November 3rd. So I hope you will join us there, or if you're coming here now to watch this talk back after seeing the film, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you enjoyed today's conversation. I will get out of the way and let Tamer and George take the floor. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmina, for the introduction. And Mr. Ruggli, it's so great to be with you here today. I'm so excited, and there's a couple congratulations in order. You said this is your feature-length debut, so that's incredible, and it's been getting warm reception from all the film festivals it's debuted at this year, so I'm sure that must be really incredible. And if I'm not mistaken, this is also the North American premiere at the Arab Film Media Institute, or at the Arab Film Festival, rather. So again, that's really wonderful. So I got to watch the film about a couple of weeks ago. You were kind enough to send me a screener, and I love the film. Though I will admit I'm a little biased because my family's from Alexandria. So when I saw that, I have to see the film. I have to. But yes, I genuinely loved it. And if you wouldn't mind saying, a few words about what the film is about before we dive into it.
Sure. I mean, the movie, as I said, it's like it's very close to my heart because it's so inspired of my childhood memories when I was a kid, when I grew up, when I lived with my grandparents in Iskander, in Alexandria, and in Cairo. So it's really like kind of a fusion between my own childhood memories and all the stories that my mother told me as a kid, and her somehow complicated relationships she had with her mother. So it's kind of a blend, which is of course fictionalized, but it's very much our family portrait in a sense.
And I think that really comes to bear in the film. And there's so many aspects of family and coming to terms with family and confronting the past in the film that I really love. And it's really incredible to see, and I can't wait to hear what viewers think of it, because I thought, when I viewed it, in my interpretation, it was very, very powerful. And one thing I really liked about the film too is there's a sense of nostalgia, there's a sense of longing when you watch the film, and there's a lot that contributes to it. There's a real emphasis on warm lighting, the color grading, and I think the costuming and set design in particular were really fantastic, and I think deserve all the laurels and accolades that they get. And there's this Egyptian writer, Amr Ali, and he has this quote that I think was in my mind when I watched the film, and he says this: "What romance is to Paris and what ambition is to New York, nostalgia is to Alexandria." And I like that quote a lot because it really captures how important it is to me and how it is to a lot of other people. So I'm curious to hear in your words, what is your relationship to the city of Alexandria, and how does that play into the film?
Well, for me, I grew up in Switzerland, so my family in Switzerland isn't like very warm-hearted like the Egyptian part of my family, obviously. So Egypt was always there when I was a kid because we always went there visiting, and I was very close to my Egyptian family. And my grandmother exiled to Alexandria. So every time we went to Egypt, we first visited my granddad in Cairo, then went to Alexandria. So Alexandria was always kind of this landmark really afar, where I always knew when I get there, everything's gonna be like in the past, like still be there as I left it. So I think Alexandria for me has this kind of very, very particular vibe that is kind of timeless. And I figured that a lot of Egyptian people also have like this image of Alexandria, even if it's changed now over the time, but you still have like this reminiscence of what Alexandria was, and this blend of cultures and language and history. And so I think it's if you compare it to Europe, it has kind of this Dolce Vita kind of vibe to it that is very, very specific, I think, in Middle East.
No, that's great to hear. I think I'm in diaspora, right? I was born here in America, but the couple of times that I've been to Alexandria, I'm also very struck by how in the past it is and in the history. And I think that's a very big aspect of the city that I think also comes to play out in the film, and which I really appreciated. And on that note, there's a couple of shots in the film too that I found just jaw-droppingly gorgeous. And in these shots, you feature a lot of prominent Egyptian iconography: the pyramids, the Corniche in Alexandria, which is the promenade along the Mediterranean, and of course the Mediterranean itself. And you have these incredible tracking shots. When I don't want to spoil too much for the viewers, but when Sue is in the car, and I love them. I can't really remember the last time we've gotten shots of Egypt like that, where you really just see that beauty on display. And from what I understand, you did film and produce some of Back to Alexandria in Egypt. How was that process of producing the film in the country?
I insisted on shooting in Egypt because there were obviously other options that could have been easier, but I think Egypt in general has this very, very particular energy to it. And also it was important for me, for the crew also, to like immerse themselves into how Egypt works and how Egyptian people are, and to the Egyptian humor also, which is very, very particular. Like, you have this kind of different kind of lifestyle. You get over problems in a different way than we do in Europe. So it was really important for me to locate the whole shoot in Egypt, and also do shooting scenes in Alexandria. But I always wanted to like show Egypt through my eyes, or how I remember Egypt as a child or adolescent. So it was really important to me to show like a nostalgic and beautiful side of Egypt that is not often shown in contemporary Egyptian cinema, for instance. And I really wanted to have this kind of point of view of how Cairo, how Zamalek, how Alexandria can feel like.
That's really incredible. And you said you shot the whole film in Egypt. So that's
Yeah, like,
really incredible. I imagine that was like a difficult process. Like, what were some of the obstacles or challenges that you faced while doing that?
I mean, organizing, like Swiss people, we are really like, if you say you get to point A at 9 a.m., we're gonna be there. So there's not a lot of flexibility to it, and Egypt is like, especially in shooting, is like constantly changing and evolving, and you got authorizations that you don't get in the end. So you always have to like adapt to what is happening, what is going on. Also, electricity shutoffs quite regular, so you also have to like to deal with how can you continue working in these conditions, and there's everything is very complicated in a sense, but it's very riveting. I mean, I felt very energized by this whole experience. I think the crew also, and I think it's something that we also find in the movie, this kind of letting go, or this kind of touch of humor as well, that also Nadine, who was immersed in this Egyptian culture, got along very well with it, and Fanny Ardant also, who loved this kind of atmosphere that was the whole shoot. So I think it's infused a lot in the images in the end.
That's really wonderful to hear. I imagine it was a bit of a like a journey as well for you and the cast to go and to do that. But I'm glad to hear it worked out.
Yeah, it was complicated, but I think it was really the experience that made this whole thing worth, and also working with Egyptian actors, which are very famous in the Arab world. And I can speak Egyptian Arabic, of course, but I'm still like, I don't have the vocabulary to still like direct maybe actors like they're used to in Egypt. So also working with these kind of different acting levels, because we have halqat, like a more telenovela style of acting. We got theater style. You got Nadine, who is very, let's say, European kind of art house film, and Fanny, who has this different kind of acting. Also, like combining all these different schools and patterns, and make something that's kind of fitting, who feels right in the end, which was important for me.
And it comes together. And that's brings me to my next question. That was something that I was curious about. So when I watched the film, you of course have Nadine Lebaki, who's a wonderful actress, director in her own right. She's plays Sue, the main character, and you have Fanny Ardant, who plays her mother Fayrouz. And I didn't realize until after the film that Fanny Ardant, she's actually not Arab, she's she's French, but in the film it's completely and utterly believable. And I think it's really interesting how you leverage that into the concept of the film. So how did you have the idea to cast Ardant, and what was it like working with both her and Lebaki?
Well, Fanny for me is like, she represents this kind of women I grew up with, who are like supreme kind of women, like they are always like up here and they like flow through life and always look more important and more beautiful and more talented than everybody else, but in a very, not in a condescending way. Like she can say rough stuff, but it's still with a smile, so it's kind of forgiven when it comes from her. And so yeah, I was really inspired by these kind of women. And Fanny Ardon, I had a chance to meet her a couple of times before we started shooting, like a couple of years before we started shooting, and we could sympathize. And she had this background, I think her mother, who is Algerian but very, very far away, so she kind of has this love for Middle Eastern culture, especially Lebanon and Egypt. So she really loved playing this character in the end. And I think Fayrouz is interesting because she's like not necessarily likable, like she's not, but the audience kind of is gonna discover her and find out who she is and why she became that way. And it's kind of she's gotta have this tender heart in the end, which was interesting for her to play. And Nadine, who is a director that I admire a lot, it's Sukar Banat, Caramel, which was like for me kind of give like a new life or a new wind to like Arab cinema. Where she tells stories in a very human way, but there are very just human feelings. I mean, it could be said anywhere in the world and doesn't have to do with Middle Eastern problematic or whatever. So it really just telling a story in a very human and sentimental way. And I love that about that film, Sokar Banat. And when I had the chance to discuss the role with Nadine, she just finished Capernaum, where she was nominated for the Oscars, etc., etc. So everything took a little bit more time until she got like engaged and on board on this movie. But since the beginning, it was like obvious for me that it was she who's gonna play Sue.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you've had the idea for this film ever since Kafr Nahum. So I know that came out a couple years ago, and that's really where it brought Nadine Lebeki into the mainstream. So what was the process of coming up with the idea for this film, and how long has it been in development for you?
We've been developing it for 10 years prior to shooting, so it took time. It's also a first feature, so yeah, it took time and it changed a lot over the years. It wasn't this story at all, so we slowly started shifting the story to Egypt because it was something that was very more close to my heart and to what I wanted to tell in the end. So my producers in Switzerland got along with it. Also, they weren't like backing off or whatever. So this took long. We had COVID, which also like made us lose a couple of years. And then yeah, I mean schedules because of the actors, you have to like adapt and financing, which is always a complicated way for a first feature in Europe.
That's so interesting. A 10-year production process, but and I imagine the film, like you say, changed a lot along that time. Do you mind saying a little bit more about how your vision for the film changed and how it evolved into the final product that we have here today?
Well, I mean, I think during the writing process, I got like much more closer to my Egyptian heritage. Even it was always like something that I had like in mind or wanted to talk about. But I kind of, me also during this process, I came way closer to my family history, speaking also language Egyptian better than I did before. So it kind of really was this approach also of me of going back into the past and talking it over with my mom, because there was also a lot of personal stuff going on. There was her personal history and her having this kind of distance to me doing a fiction about something she lived or a relationship she had with her mother, which was really interesting. And I think for her freeing also in a sense of like telling her story, but in a lighthearted and fun way also, because it's of course very emotional, but I think there's a lot of love and tenderness in this movie, and especially between all these characters, even if they hate each other or say very mean words to throw mean words to each other. There's always like this kind of sense of love, of deep love and connection, and they're like they just can't say it that way. So that was interesting for me.
And I think it really hits home for a lot of people, and I think especially when you're in diaspora and you wrestle with these ideas of like what family means, between like Western ideas of family and like ideas of family that you have from the Egyptian side or the Arab side. I think that's something that I really, really appreciate about the film. And of course, there's a lot of talk about this being a movie about trauma and guilt and moving forward, and it's absolutely there. And I think it's very potent. But in my interpretation, I also see this as being a movie about diaspora. When Sue goes back to Egypt, she's really struck by how unfamiliar some of it is. The people she meets, say that, she's a little bit, a little bit strange, like the taxi driver that she meets. And that's one aspect of the film that I think is, almost a little underappreciated. How do you see ideas of diaspora tying into this film, or how did this, or when you were like conceiving the idea for this film, how did you think of your own experience relating to Sue's journey going back to Egypt?
Well, I really appreciate what you're saying, because it's something that also comes. People have been keep telling this. Also, people who live abroad and from the diaspora who has this, like, we have a different connection to what our heritage or homeland can be, and this sense of belonging, because you want to belong there, and once you get there, you have like this feeling you're not fitting in a sense, and you're trying either you're trying your best to like fit in, or you're gonna like reject this whole situation and try to flow through it in a superior kind of way. So I think Sue was really there's a lot of me in her, in Nadine's character, because obviously when I go back to Egypt, you always have like this moment of adaptation, of being accepted, of blending in, of letting yourself like go and blend yourself in. And there's always like these 3-4 days where you finally feel like, okay, I belong there, I feel at ease walking there, and I feel one of being part of this world. So this was very, very important for me. And also this kind of love-hate relationship that she can have, like when she's in the cab and there's Ahwek from Abdel Halim Hafiz playing in the radio, she's like, there's like this moment where she tries to like, no, I'm not gonna let it get to me, but still like there's like this automatic reaction that she starts singing it, because it's like so anchored inside her. There's like an automatic reaction to this song playing. So I think there's like this contradiction, which was very interesting for me.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because I think that's, when I watched it, that was one of the moments that I think struck me the most, because Ahwek is such a powerful song, and I think the way it talks about this push and pull relationship, in the song it's in the context of a romantic relationship where like you're not sure if you love the person or not, and you just keep wanting them even if they're bad for you, etc. But I think it's almost a model for how it is being in diaspora, because you love the country and the relationship that you have, but at the same time it pushes you away. And I think I really loved how you put that in the film, and I think, I don't want to speak for viewers, but I think that people are really gonna love this film and connect with it, who are in the diaspora. So I think there's a lot to chew on in the film, which I think is really incredible. And I wanted to dive a little bit more into the production of the film. So I just, I want to ask you just a total Hot Ones style question, if you've ever seen Hot Ones. But so I know the screenwriter or one of the screenwriters for this was Yusri Nasrallah, and he was a frequent collaborator of Yusuf Shaheen, who made the Alexandria trilogy. So I find it very fascinating that there's not so many cinematic depictions of Alexandria as a city in media, but the ones that exist, the Alexandria trilogy and Back to Alexandria, are kind of loosely connected, by Shaheen and Yusri Nasrallah and
Marianne Khouri.
So how was the process of working with him, and how do you see this work as being connected to what Yusuf Shaheen did with the Alexandria trilogy, if at all?
I think, well, Yusuf Shaheen also had this connection to childhood and to his family, and Yusri also with his first feature, which was very inspired by his own family history and him as a child, how he navigated through this world. So I think there's a lot of themes that we have in common without being necessarily influenced by. Yusri was always, I grew up with hearing a lot of stories about Yusri, because my mom used to work with Yusri's sister, which is the great costume designer Nahid Nasrallah. So I always it was always a name that was like familiar to me, but we never had like the occasion to like meet properly. We met during film school when I went to a festival, and I came up to him to speak, to tell him who I was, that I was the son of Cuisine, etc. So, but he didn't realize. It was until somebody, the co-producer, actually said we would be good to have like a point of view of somebody who's working and living in Egypt on the script, and who said that we could work with Yusri, which was a great opportunity. And I think he understood those people in the script so well, because he grew up with these kind of characters as well as did Shaheen as well. So we had really fun, like getting into dialogues and developing these characters. But he came in a very late stage of the film, of the screenwriting, where it was really like putting like more of the Egyptian soul, if I may say, into the characters, into the story, and so the story took also another shift. An interesting aspect, for instance, the actress who plays Aunt Inji, Minha Batrawi, she played in Shaheen's films, she played in Yusuf's first film, and she plays in my first film. So she's also like kind of this figure that kind of travels through those different universes of Alexandrian history, which is nice.
That's wonderful. That's really cool to hear. And the fact that you have that connection with him is really wonderful too. And hopefully, yeah, I mean, all these cinematic depictions of Alexandria, just, as someone in diaspora who really loves Alexandria, it's always so wonderful to see how people conceive of the city and how it relates to them. And we've talked a little bit about this being your feature-length debut and the production process. But now that you're on the other side of it, having completed it, having debuted it, and seeing the reception, when you look back on it, is there something that you learned about yourself as a filmmaker or a storyteller from the process of making Back to Alexandria?
Well, I think it was the first feature, and I've had a very good team around me of people who were way more experienced than myself, and I think I felt I could trust them because we talked a lot about my vision, about how I see things, how I see the characters, the set design, the costumes. So I felt really safe with this whole team. As a director, it was hard because you're kind of the captain of the boat and you have less experience than everybody else. So you feel lost often, if not all the times. And giving directions to famous actors in Egyptian or in French or in English, which was very, very challenging. But in the end, I think like there's like this universal language that kind of, you get to know the people and you get to know the actors and they kind of blend into your universe. And this is when the beauty happens, where everybody's like on the same page and you don't have to like over explain everything. And I think that's a very, well, for me, it was very beautiful shoot this whole experience, because I felt like everybody was really like pulling in the same direction and trying their best to like blend into the image that I had of them or their character in the movie. So yeah, as a first experience, it was a hard, tough shoot in Egypt. I think we had a lot of elements that were very complicated for a first feature, but I think every shooting has its difficulties. So I'm very happy to start like with a very difficult one, and hopefully the next one's going to be a little bit less complicated.
Inshallah. Inshallah. But you know what? It ended up great. I'm unbiased, but I think really you have something wonderful on your hands, and I'm excited for the viewers to see it. And that brings me to, I think, the last thing I want to ask you today. So ahead of the film's premiere, what is one thing you want the viewers to know, either about yourself or about the film?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Oh, sorry. Like, what's one thing you want to leave the viewers with? What's one thing you want to say ahead of the film, like either about you as a filmmaker or just about the film itself?
I think that love can have so different faces. And I always grew up telling those stories in Europe, and people were like off because they didn't like understand those characters or how they could communicate in that way, in this harsh way, because it's kind of also a way to like not being seen as somebody who is how do you say it, who has this faible. Sorry, I'm looking for the word. Somebody who's still strong, like who doesn't have this failure inside. And I think it's a very specific, for me, a specific way of communication between these people. And I also, the feeling of for me, which was important, was childhood, and how important, how much childhood trauma can make its way into your future life, how much it can determine who you're going to become, or in the contrary, who you're not going to be, because you're just not going to think of you in that way or let yourself live in that way. And there's this very nice sentence that a French author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, from The Little Prince, said, I'm as much from my childhood as I am from a country. And I think like cultural identity is really, you become who you are during childhood, because this is where you're going to be built. This is where you're going to have the codes in the world that you're going to live with, the people you're going to live with. And I think it's so much formating in this very particular time that it's something that's gonna be there through all your life. So I think this character of Sue, which drags her childhood until now and finally becomes an adult at it's coming of age story, but at a later stage in life for her. If that is clear, I don't, maybe a lot of information.
No, I
or
think
intentions, but
no, I think there's a lot to even bite on in just what you said. I think I'm very struck by what you said. Love has many different faces, and I think that's a very real aspect of, you know, growing up in a different, you know, in a non-Western culture. And I think that's something that, again, you know, comes to bear in diaspora, where you realize like love can be expressed and seen in many different ways. There's not just one way, and that's something that I think is great to have in cinema and to see on screen. You know, like to see maybe that your experience as like, you know, with your family or your parents, it's not the only one out there. You know, like, you know, my relationship, you know, I see some of this in this film as well. So I think it's going to resonate with a lot of viewers. So thank you for being with us here today, and again, congratulations on
thank you.
you know,
Thank
the feature
you.
length debut.
Thank you very much.